I've picked up on quite the phenomenon. Maybe other people will get how I feel. Maybe I'm on an island, but it's just one of those things where the more I think about it, I find it kind of interesting. So I was a kid when Spectacular Spider-Man came out. I was someone who liked the 90s show. That was my favorite one. I also liked the original 67 cartoon and then Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. You know, the very just I had some level of interest in most other cartoons relating to the character up to that point. And I liked Spectacular because I felt that it was taking a lot of the character's mythos and being able to blend things from these different iterations, right? You had some stuff with that was imported from the original continuity and then Ultimate Spider-Man. And when that show was canceled after 2 seasons, I was open to Ultimate Spider-Man, the replacement cartoon, which came out about 2 or 3 years after the fact. And that show was terrible. I followed it for 2 seasons. I thought it was overly reliant on quips, breaking the fourth wall. The supporting cast was very underdeveloped or just not developed at all. And I said to myself, after that show came out and then it ultimately, went on for several years, and then we had this other one that came out a few years later that went for like 3 years. They just called it Spider-Man because I guess we can't give original names to these things anymore. But I thought, isn't it interesting how a self-proclaimed Spider-Man fan who at one point really, was always open to different versions of the character, excited for these, various cartoons and whatnot that would come out, would just go from, liking pretty much all of the cartoons to some degree or another to being so like turned off by the newest one that when they make another one after that, he doesn't even bother to check it out. And the more I thought about it, I said, I think I would dislike Ultimate Spider-Man on its own merits. Like if Spectacular didn't exist and we just went from like I don't know, the '90s show and Unlimited and whatever to then Ultimate over 10 years later, I still think I would still dislike Ultimate. But I had to ask myself, is that dislike furthered by the fact that this is the show which replaced what I felt was, and many fans feel, is a superior product? And that was where that dissonance started to arrive, where you would think if someone's a fan of a character, right, they're going to be more and more open to just getting these different versions of it. But it's like the more versions of it you have, the less interested you are in these different attempts at doing what's effectively the same thing. Like, even if Ultimate and then this other show that came out a few years later are similar to Spectacular, and then it's this high school version of Peter Parker, that first show, right, Spectacular, has several other things about it which are appealing that these subsequent ones, or at the very least Ultimate, I did not feel either had or did not have to a satisfactory degree. And those flaws were more noticeable to me because I had something else which I could compare it to that, of course, would naturally draw a comparison with. But just as an example of what I'm getting at here, I was a fan of Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes. That was the Avengers cartoon that came out like in the preluding years to the first Avengers movie. And up to that point, we'd only had one Avengers cartoon, which was like I think in the '90s, and didn't even have like the big three Avengers. And it was something that was so from so long ago and so different that they were basically starting from scratch. You really couldn't compare the two of them because they were just so drastically different from each other. And I really liked this show. I felt it was kind of similar to Spectacular, right, with like building up premises and having these various classic versions of characters that were updated in a more modern setting. And when this show was canceled for Avengers Assemble, which was made to kind of like have a more similar roster to what we had in the movies at the time, I said, and I gave Assemble a chance, but I said this show, referring to Assemble, if it came out, like if Earth's Mightiest Heroes never existed, it was just we went from the Avengers cartoon in the 90s and then assemble in like, what was that, 2012, 2013. If if that show came out without there being a show before it that I considered a superior product, I probably would like it more. Like I probably would say, hey, this is not like taking up space or anything. But the fact that it, in my view, was an inferior successor to a show that could have lasted longer, but was, in my view, taken out prematurely for something that was worse, kind of like with Spectacular and Ultimate. It just, there was a lot of like negative feelings that, you know, were there going into watching it that just kind of festered as it went on. And you see this even with the movies, where I always maintain the Raimi trilogy is my, you know, favorite live action iteration of Spider-Man. That's unlikely to change. People can say it's due to nostalgia or whatever, but I have liked the Holland version as well, just not to the same degree. But you look at TASM, right? The first one. And this is a movie that I like. You know, again, not to whatever degree the other one, but just like you think about this movie. This is a film that was made as part of an attempt by Sony to keep the rights to Spider-Man. This is a film that retells the origin for the second time in 10 years. And it's like, again, this movie I don't think is bad, but would I like it more if the Raimi trilogy didn't exist? Like, would I think this movie was better or have a more favorable view of it? Probably. But the position going into making that film is to try to appeal to the people who had problems with the Raimi trilogy. Oh, this version of Spider-Man makes more jokes, and you know he has this darker tone, and you know it's like then you look at the MCU version, where the criticisms of that iteration was, oh, he's Iron Boy Jr., right? The villains from the first two solo films are just Tony Stark enemies. And, you know, again, when you look at this stuff, and even when you have people like Kevin Feige come out and say, we didn't do villains from the previous Sony films because we wanted to use different Spider-Man villains, it's like you look at that and you have to really ask yourself, if the Raimi trilogy did not cast this long shadow over subsequent live action portrayals of the character, would they be better? You know, like, would the MCU version of Spider-Man just not have Green Goblin or Doc Ock for a whole 2 or 3 movies until, you know, we got No Way Home? But would they have gone that long without using basic iconic Spider-Man villains if the Raimi trilogy hadn't have used them first, right? Because their whole thing was, we want to make this as, you know, different from what came before, right? That's why we have no, instead of just giving Peter his best friend Harry Osborn, we get Ned, right? We get Hobgoblin refitted as his friend. You know, this is just an example I'm talking about, where you look at these adaptations, and they're not, even if you like them to, you know, some degree or another, you ask yourself, is this really something that you can feel like it's of value? You know, like is this really a thing where it's not hurt by the fact that something better came out before it? Because I remember, you know, back when, and I might even make a movie, excuse me, a version of just kind of like what I think that film would have played out as. But I remember January 2010 when they canceled the 4th Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, and just, you know, that extra 2 years of waiting for the first film in the reboot series, and being open to a new version of Spider-Man. But after seeing TASM 2, which I maintain is one of the worst superhero films ever made, I don't care if people are trying to like retroactively say it's good. It is the modern day Batman and Robin, except without the charm. When I look at that, how that series played out, when I look at the fact that that series was made simply so Sony could keep the rights, right? I can't help but feel like if you were to just have, you know, let's say Raimi Spider-Man 3 in 2007, and then just almost 10 years of no new Spider-Man movie until we get, you know, what was it, Homecoming? Would anything of any value really be lost? And again, that's not to say that, you know, TASM 1 and even to a lesser degree TASM 2 don't have some merits to them. But this goes back to my point of when we get so many different iterations of the character, which are not breaking ground, not really doing anything to stand out that much, they're just going to keep getting met with a more lukewarm response for me. Look at Fantastic Four, for example. You know, you had the two Tim Story films in 2005, 2007, and I like those. And the third one gets canceled, and they're like, "Oh, we're going to do a reboot," and I'm open to it. And then the reboot ends up being so goddamn awful, right? Like just completely terrible, uh, to where we don't get another new movie for 10 years. And it's like you ask yourself, if we went from 2007 to 2025, right, and there was just no Fantastic Four movie in that, what is that, a 16, 17, 18-year period, would anything of any value have been lost? Would anything have really just, oh man, we didn't get that. I do feel like if we got the third Tim Story Fantastic Four movie, it might have actually been pretty good. But that's just going off of what I know about it. But my point I'm making here is, do you see where the more of these adaptations, these subpar new adaptations that we get, the lesser interest you have, because they are trying so hard to be different from something else without being able to be good on their own. And man, I remember the excitement for that fourth film, and then for the first reboot. Because with most of this stuff, I give it a chance, right? But it's, I don't know. It's like we're sitting here with 8 live action Spider-Man films, and I only watch with regularity maybe 4 of them. It's like that. That's not because I'm against different people playing Spider-Man besides Maguire, but it's just I've never felt the connection or just story satisfactory with the other 2 iterations. And I think a lot of that has to do with directions taken by both writers and directors to try and differentiate those iterations from the Raimi version, which have been detrimental to their own iterations being able to actually be impactful in some positive way. And I really start thinking, maybe it is a thing where there's just so much of it that you get sick of it. Because if you look at most superheroes, they really don't have, like multiple iterations running. I mean, even someone as basic as Superman, we get like what, one live action movie every 10 years? He's had 3 movies in the last 30 years. So like even a character like that, I'm like, yeah, let's get more. Let's see more. I want more movies with them. But then, you look at like Wonder Woman, for example. If they made a Wonder Woman cartoon tomorrow, I'd be much more excited for that than a Spider-Man cartoon, because we have must be 6 or 7 goddamn Spider-Man cartoons, and we've never had a Wonder Woman one before. That I would say the same thing about Flash. And if they made, Fantastic Four, X-Men, yeah, they've had some cartoons before, but it's been a while since they had, one that ran for like several seasons and was around for a while. So you get the idea that it's not really like, oh, I'm just sick of superheroes. It's if I keep getting this same character over and over again, more and more iterations that I just don't think are really necessary or doing something interesting, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm kind of like ready to tap out here. And I know, again, it's not like, oh, I'm just sick of Spider-Man, because I liked the Spider-Verse movies. I, like the various games that come out. So there is still some devotion or desire to see more of that character. But my point still stands that with so many versions of something, which are oftentimes trying as hard as they can to not be like what came before, right? Ultimate Spider-Man's like, oh man, we can't be like Spectacular. We have to do something completely different with all these superhero cameos and this team of Shield agent or whatever. And then you have Tasman the Raimi trilogy. Oh, we need to like make more jokes, and he needs to have more web shooters that he creates, and turn Gwen Stacy into Mary Jane, but the blonde version. When you look at that stuff, you ask yourself, is this about making the story better, or is it just that you feel handicapped, and really self-imposed handicap, because they do it to themselves, by the fact that there was a previous beloved iteration that you're trying to distance yourself from because you know that your successor is just a hollow imitation. It's wild to think about, but you had Spider-Man stories in like the 80s, 90s, even like the early 2000s, right? Like when I was starting to, grow up and be able to actually read comics, where you had this married version of Peter, and there was even like some toying around with the idea of him being a dad, right, with Spider-Girl. And with the adaptations of this character, really from, I'd say, 2008 up until now, there's been this refusal, not counting, again, stuff like the live action films, and then also, and I shouldn't even say that, but just there are a few exceptions, but there's been this continued sort of resistance to having him grow up, having him mature, having him become anything other than the same, high school to barely college age adult that is making jokes. And it's really sad that we get all these iterations of this character, and it's always going to be the same thing over and over again. All these live action movies, all these TV shows, it's always Peter in high school. You haven't had I don't think you've had a cartoon where he's in college since since Unlimited. I can go back and check, but you get the idea. Like, it's not really, am I sick of Spider-Man? This is arguably my favorite fictional character, period. It's more so that if every version of him is going to be either the same thing or, something that's like afraid to do something different, then I'm not excited for it. Like, how wild is it to have 8 live action films and feel like you could delete half of them and it just wouldn't make a difference? Like, am I really going to be watching TASM or TASM 2 in 10 years? No. How crazy is it to have, 7, 8, 9 cartoons, and then you can delete half of those, and it would make no difference. Am I going to watch Ultimate Spider-Man ever again? Subject myself to that torture? No. Am I going to check out the one that ran for 3 years after that? Nope. And it's kind of sad how wasteful it is, because it's like you see all these other superheroes that never get a cartoon, and it's like, man, we could possibly have something really good if you gave one of them, 26 episodes or 2 seasons or 3 seasons, but we just have to keep making the same Spider-Man show. Teenager who can never grow up, can never mature, other than some alternate universes, right? But it's like that's what's so sad to me. Like, I would have so much preferred to just be open to these different versions of the character, and I have been. But it's like, again, when they just keep starting over and starting over and starting over, I just lose interest. So I know I've rambled. I know I probably sound crazy. But it's a real thing when there's so many adaptations of a character that they hurt each other. Like, I think some of these shows are afraid of the show that came before, so they try to be different. Some of these movies, same thing. And all it does is just make me not even want to bother with watching or trying out any of the new versions, because I know that it's going to be the same thing for the third, fourth, fifth, sixth time.